Chapter 3 Frother and Hairy. Frother is a magnificent young Doolan dragon. Despite only being 15 years old, he's already developed that distinctive lime green marbled skin tone that so clearly distinguishes Doolan dragons from other types of dragons. You might say that he is an early bloomer. His enormous silver nostrils look like heavy-duty exhaust pipes, and his colossal head is softened by an extremely elegant, metre-high mohawk of thick powder blue hair. His lemon-yellow ears, carrot-orange lips, and psychedelic purple eyes add the finishing touches. His skin is as hard and as smooth as fiberglass, except for his underbelly, which is as soft and as comfortable as a beanbag. Despite his incredibly powerful presence, he is in fact a very shy, gentle dragon, who lacks self-confidence and speaks with a severe stutter. Frother had sadly parted ways with his clan of Doolan dragons when he was only 9 years of age. This was the age at which he contracted the rare and dreaded dragon throat disease. It gave him what appeared to be a mild form of emphysema, and permanently removed his ability to breathe out flames. All that he now breathed out was hot, steamy air. Because a Doolan dragon's entire worth is measured by the ferocity of its flames, he was seen as totally useless and placed at the very bottom of the pecking order. How he had wished at the time that his parents had still been alive to protect and comfort him. Sadly, both had been killed a few years earlier in a well-executed surprise attack launched by King Mullimus, king of the Burlian dragon slayers, and 5 of his best warriors. At least both of his parents managed to kill a dragon slayer with one well-timed slap of their deadly tails before succumbing to the barrage of heated arrowheads that pierced through their soft underbellies like hot knives through butter. They reportedly fell to the ground at almost exactly the same time. Frother's fatally wounded dad is said to have tried valiantly to pull himself towards his dying dragon wife, but fell short by only a few meters. This sad image still haunts Frother. Why couldn't they just have had that one final embrace? Doolan dragons are not very maternal by nature when it comes to looking after their sick, elderly, injured or orphaned. Orphans are welcome to stay with the clan, but must learn to fend for themselves. Because Frother was unable to hunt without his flames, he had to change his diet to one of fruits, vegetables, berries and roots. Having no flames and chewing on berries made him appear very effeminate in the eyes of many of the macho Doolan dragon boys. Frother soon gained the unenviable nickname of Flameless Filly amongst them. The word filly made reference to the female Modesta unicorn that the Burlian dragon slayers used to provide them with passage when hunting Doolan dragons. Being referred to as flameless and being compared to a female unicorn were 2 of the highest forms of insult imaginable in Doolan dragon culture. The same group of Doolan dragons also enjoyed singeing Frother's beautiful blue mohawk. Every time it grew back, they would burn it to its base again. They would tie him to one of the enormous fire-resistant stone trees and then take turns aiming blowtorch-like flames at his mohawk from a distance. Creating such a thin, continuous flame required a lot of skill and control. To put it in perspective, it is comparative to us humans trying to blow perfect rings of mist out of our mouth on freezing cold winter mornings. Although Frother's skin was too tough to be seriously burned by any wayward flames, he still had to close his eyes the entire time and protect his delicate pink tummy. Whilst they all viewed this activity as being little more than boyish mischief, and always tried their best to ensure that he never suffered any physical pain, the emotional pain and scarring cut much deeper than physical pain ever could have. The trauma of the consistent abuse and taunts and general lack of compassion caused his severe stutter condition. Prior to these events, he spoke confidently and fluently. To escape the daily abuse and ridicule that he suffered at the hands of other Doolan dragons, Frother decided to take permanent refuge in a cave surrounded by heavy undergrowth on the west side of Glen Mountain. He realised at the time that moving to Flushflea's territory was dangerous. But what were his options? To the east lived the ferocious tribe of Burlian dragon slayers. To the north live the evil and deadly Tishy gnomes, and to the south is Death Desert, a graveyard for the abandoned elderly and dying. But Flush Fleas was dangerous for Frother only because Doolan dragons are hated by the peace-loving soul wizards and sugar fairies who reside here. This is because these permanently ravenous dragons continually invade Flush Fleas in search of sugar fairies. They find sugar fairies' meat to be tastier than any other source of protein at their disposal. The high sugar content makes the meat very sweet. They do not like the taste of soul wizards, mind you, and avoid them like the plague. They find the taste of their synthetic skin to be about as repugnant as eating a pair of rubber galoshes. Despite Frother having become a vegetarian since losing his flames, he would still have been treated like an enemy if spotted, and he therefore never ventured further down than the foothills of Glen Mountain. He also only ever left his cave in the early hours of morning or late at night. Fortunately, his eyes were designed for both day and night vision. The fairies and wizards of Flush Fleas lived in a consistent fear of these Doolan dragons and tried to use their strongest magic against them. However, even the most powerful wizard spells had limited success. Doolan dragon skin is generally too strong and thick for the magic to penetrate deep enough inwards to inflict any serious damage. At best, their magic may disrupt a Doolan dragon temporarily. Furthermore, the stronger the magical spell, the more energy it sapped from its master's wand, often leaving their wands too tired and lethargic to function any further. Without their wands, soul wizards and sugar fairies were powerless to defend themselves and became extremely susceptible to counterattack. Only supreme wands carved from the wood of the oldest and wisest of shrewd trees are capable of destroying Doolan dragons. However, none, other than Dementia, had the magical prowess required to control such a powerful wand. Unfortunately, though, Dementia's services were in such high demand in the territories surrounding Flush Fleas that he was hardly ever home to protect his fellow wizards and fairies. As soon as he departed, the Doolan dragons would recommence their attacks. Anyway, getting back to Frother. Since taking refuge on Glen Mountain, the shy and reclusive Doolan dragon had developed two really close friendships. One was with a gluten spider named Harry, and the other was with our beloved gothic sugar fairy, Magica. Gluten spiders are one of the largest species of arachnid known to exist in the greater universe. The 11-year-old Harry is no exception. His body looks almost identical to one of those enormous Halloween pumpkins, in terms of size, shape and colour. His head is just a smaller version of his body, save for the eyes, ears and mouth. Each of his 30 chunky limbs has a 20-centimetre span and is covered in thick, bright orange, prickly hairs. He has gentle, hazel-brown eyes that exude warmth and goodwill. His ears are little more than buttonholes and are very poorly designed for hearing. His mouth is enormous and, despite being toothless, is capable of producing the most welcoming of smiles. His flamingo-pink lips always wobble as he speaks, and he speaks with a lisp. The lisp makes understanding what he's saying quite difficult at times. He pronounces every single letter S as th. So, for example, the word sorrow exits his mouth sounding like thorough, and elastic as elastic. Up until recently, he used to also pronounce every single letter R as W. He now only pronounces R's as W's for about 30% of the words that exit his mouth. This inconsistency, though, can in itself be quite confusing. For instance, the word hurry exits his mouth sounding like hurry, whilst the word arrange exits sounding like arrange. I know, very weird. Harry became an orphan at age 5, after his mother and all of his siblings were gobbled up by a flock of hunting grogler birds whilst foraging for food at the base of Glen Mountain. The distraught and frightened young gluten spider somehow managed to escape capture and had run for his life. After sprinting continuously for over 4 kilometres and making it 3/4 of the way up the mountain, he came upon what appeared to be an abandoned cave. Apart from a variety of dried-out fruit and berry pips that were scattered around the floor of the cave, there was nothing else to suggest permanent habitation. He therefore had no idea at the time that it was home to Frother, and that the friendly Doolan dragon was simply out collecting fruits and berries. Harry then spent several hours urgently securing the entrance with an enormous invisible web. It was a mammoth task and left the emotionally spent gluten spider feeling physically exhausted. When he was finally done, he crawled into a corner and wept himself to sleep. Frother returned to his cave a few minutes later and walked straight through the invisible web. It was no match for his brute strength. The vibrations caused by Frother's footsteps immediately awoke Harry. However, instead of trying to escape, Harry stood dead still and resigned himself to his fate. In a way, he was pleased that he was about to die. He'd lost his mum and his siblings, and lacked the tools and knowledge to fend for himself. Living would simply be too difficult. Death would put a definitive end to his misery. However, he certainly did not wish to undergo a painful death. He had once accidentally burnt 5 of his limbs in a fire, and he still recorded how excruciatingly painful that had been. He had learned from his late mum that Doolan dragons shot ferocious flames. He would therefore need to somehow persuade the enormous Doolan dragon that stood before him not to use its flames. Being a typical gluten spider, Harry still also managed to think about food at this time of extreme crisis. He hoped to also persuade Frother to allow him to eat one last handful of delicious flusel flies before he died. Harry loved the taste of these juicy flies and could think of no more fitting way to finish his short life. "Please don't cook me, Doolan dragon!" cried Harry in his trembling lisp voice. His massive flamingo-pink lips wobbled even more dramatically as usual. "Please, just put me in your mouth and swallow me whole. Us gluten spiders taste much better uncooked, I promise. Although, would you mind terribly if I quickly ate one last handful of frugal flies and—"
It's okay, gluten spider," interrupted Frother with a compassionate smile on his face. "I'm not going to burn you alive or eat you whole.
"Oh no!" cried Harry hysterically, his imagination racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. "If not that, then what? Please don't tell me you're going to whip off my 30 limbs one by one and then leave my squirming body out to dry in the sun. How cruel you are! How very cruel you are!" Harry was recalling an awful nightmare that he had recently experienced, in which exactly this occurred.
No,
laughed Frother. But before he could finish his sentence, the panic-stricken gluten spider interrupted him once again. "Oh dear!" cried Harry. "How cruel of you to laugh! You obviously have something worse in mind. You're planning to remove the skin from my delicate back and then scoop out my insides like I'm some sort of chunky soup. You are, aren't you?" This thought was simply too much for Harry to cope with, and he fainted. Frother seized the opportunity and wrapped Harry from head to toe in a few strands of thick webbing that Harry had produced to block the cave entrance. He then opened Harry's mouth and used a large polyfruit pip to temporarily gag the unconscious pumpkin-shaped gluten spider. Harry awoke with a huge fright, but could not speak or move. Frother now had a captive audience, so to speak.
So sorry for restraining you like this," smiled Frother sympathetically. But you left me no choice. I do not eat meat and have no interest in eating you."
Harry's bulging hazel eyes returned to their normal size, and his heart palpitations slowed from a sprint to a gallop.
"I am going to free you now. You can leave if you want to, or you can stay for a while and have a friendly chat."
Harry chose to stay for a chat and told Frother his very sorry tale. Frother felt a huge amount of sympathy for and rapport with the young orphan gluten spider. He therefore kindly offered to take him in and teach him the ropes. Harry gratefully accepted the offer. Since that day, Frother has assumed the role of older brother. 6 years have passed since their first meeting, and the two of them are now inseparable. Having a stutterer and a lisper living under the same roof makes for interesting conversation. Frother had only met Magica a few years ago, Their meeting was totally accidental and occurred as follows. Whilst Magica was busily excavating tiny fragments of black Xophobian crystal from a solid vein that she'd discovered on a fragile, rocky outcrop high up on Glen Mountain, the flimsy outcrop suddenly gave way and she came crashing down with it. She hit the ground below well before her wings were able to create enough upwards thrust to assist her. She was knocked unconscious. As she awoke, she screamed with fear as Frother's huge face stared down at her from above. Her scream gave him such a fright that he jumped backwards, smashed his head on a low-hanging stalactite and fell unconscious on the ground. Magica ran to the entrance of the cave and took flight. She flew straight into an invisible cobweb that was blocking the entrance. She was sprung backwards with enormous force and missiled perfectly into Frother's soft belly, just as he was regaining consciousness and staggering to his feet. Although severely winded, he managed to grab hold of Magica.
Wait!
He stuttered nervously, as Magica struggled to wriggle herself free from his enormous arms, which were now gripping around her slender waist like a powerful vice. It took all of his concentration to avoid accidentally crushing her like an empty aluminium can. He could feel her little heart pounding like a drum.
Please don't worry, little sugar fairy, he continued in the most kind-hearted and compassionate of tones. You have nothing to fear. I mean, you no harm. I'm a very pathetic dragon. I cannot even create fire, and I don't eat meat. Not even a single fly. You can ask my spider friend Harry over there.
Magica gazed with absolute horror as the gigantic gluten spider in the corner of the cave that, judging by its size, ate plenty of meat. Harry nodded enthusiastically. It's true, he lisped. Frother lives on fruit and berries and leaves. I always beg him to taste just a single fruital fly, but he refuses every time. He has no idea what he's missing out on. With that, Harry reached up with one of his enormous limbs and grabbed a handful of flusel flies that he'd been hanging out to dry on a purpose-built web above his head. Would you like to try a few? Magica fought back her repulsion and politely declined his generous offer. This discussion was so bizarre that she immediately started to feel at ease. It was clear that neither of these adorable creatures possessed even an ounce of malice. To emphasize this, Frother apologetically explained to Magica that the enormous invisible web that she'd bounced off was designed to keep trespassers out rather than to keep creatures trapped within. Harry did capture a lot of insects in this web, but that was just an added bonus rather than its designed intention. Having explained this, Frother pulled aside a section of the invisible webbing so that Magica was now free to leave of her own volition. He begged her to please keep their location secret and to bring them no future harm. She gave her word, but instead of making a hasty retreat, she stayed for the rest of the afternoon and got to know this odd couple a little bit better. As the sun started to set, she bid them farewell. Since that day, she frequently visited Frother and Harry and has developed a very close bond with both of them.